September 1st, 1983. Somewhere over the Sea of Japan, in the freezing darkness, a Soviet fighter pilot pressed a switch and transmitted 4 words to his commander. The target is destroyed. The target was not a spy plane. It was a Boeing 747 carrying 269 people, men, women, and 22 children from 16 different countries. None of them survived. But here's what almost nobody tells you about that night. The missile didn't just trigger an international crisis. It set off a chain of events that would eventually change how billions of people move, travel, work, navigate, order food, and use the devices in their pockets every single day. You probably used it this morning. You'll use it again tonight. Here's the connection nobody made for you. The flight had started like any other. Korean Airlines Flight 007 departed New York's JFK Airport on August 31st, 1983, bound for Seoul, South Korea, with a refueling stop in Anchorage, Alaska. 269 people were on board. Men, women, and 22 children from 16 different countries. Among them was a sitting U.S. Congressman, Larry McDonald of Georgia. After refueling in Anchorage, the Boeing 747 took off again into the darkness over the North Pacific. And almost immediately, something went wrong. Silently, invisibly. At some point after departure, the crew failed to properly engage the aircraft's navigation system. Instead of following its programmed route, the plane continued on a constant heading. No alarm sounded. No warning light flashed. The deviation was small at first, barely noticeable. But over thousands of miles of open ocean, a tiny navigational error became catastrophic. 1 degree off course became 2, then 5, then 10. Hour after hour, the aircraft drifted farther north, unknowingly approaching Soviet airspace during one of the tensest moments of the Cold War. By the time Flight 007 crossed into Soviet territory, it was more than 200 miles off its intended route, flying near some of the Soviet Union's most sensitive military installations. The Soviets scrambled fighter jets. At the same time, an American RC-135 surveillance aircraft was also operating in the region, adding to the confusion. Soviet commanders concluded the unidentified aircraft could be an American spy plane. It wasn't. A Soviet Su-15 interceptor locked onto the Boeing 747. The pilot fired 2 air-to-air missiles. At 3:26 a.m., Korean Airlines Flight 007 crashed into the Sea of Japan. No one survived. Moments later, the Soviet pilot transmitted 4 words: "The target is destroyed." The world reacted with outrage. President Reagan called the attack a crime against humanity. The United States released intercepted Soviet communications, exposing the shootdown to the world. Diplomatic tensions escalated. The Cold War intensified. But 15 days after the crash, something else happened. Something that barely made headlines at the time. On September 16, 1983, Reagan's press secretary delivered a short statement at the White House. Buried inside it was a decision that would eventually reshape modern life. The United States would open its military satellite navigation system, GPS, for civilian use. The reasoning was painfully simple. If Flight 007 had been able to accurately determine its position, it would never have drifted into Soviet airspace. 269 people would still be alive. At the time, GPS was still a military technology, incomplete, expensive, and largely unknown outside defense circles. The announcement sounded technical, bureaucratic, unimportant, It wasn't. Because hidden inside that quiet policy decision was the foundation for a world that did not yet exist. But here's where the story becomes modern. Reagan's 1983 announcement opened GPS to civilians. In theory. But there was a catch. The US military intentionally degraded the civilian signal through a system called selective availability. Ordinary people could access GPS, but the data was deliberately imprecise. The margin of error could be as much as 100 meters. Good enough to roughly know where you were. Not good enough to tell you which side of the street you were standing on. That level of accuracy wasn't enough for the world that was coming. Not for smartphone navigation. Not for food delivery. Not for real-time ride-sharing. Not for a driver finding a passenger standing on a specific corner in a crowded city. Then, just after midnight on May 1st, 2000, the United States permanently disabled selective availability. Overnight, civilian GPS became dramatically more accurate. Most people barely noticed. It wasn't front-page news. But engineers noticed. Entrepreneurs noticed. Silicon Valley noticed. 9 years later, in 2009, two founders created a company built around one simple idea. A smartphone map connecting drivers and passengers using their exact real-time location. They called it Uber. And suddenly, GPS stopped being a military technology hiding in the background of society. It became infrastructure. Google Maps, Waze, DoorDash, Amazon delivery networks, FedEx route optimization, precision agriculture helping feed billions of people, financial systems using GPS timing to synchronize transactions across continents within fractions of a second. According to a 2019 study commissioned by the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, GPS generated approximately $1.4 trillion in economic benefits for the United States between the 1980s and 2017. Today, a major GPS outage would ripple through the global economy within hours. And all of it traces back to a navigational error over the Pacific Ocean, a Soviet missile, and a quiet decision made 15 days later. Because one Soviet missile, one passenger plane, and one decision made in 1983 changed how billions of people move, work, travel, order food, navigate cities, and use the devices in their pockets every single day. You are living inside the consequences of that moment.